I, it is this one, right? Standard energy supply, retail consumer?
Yes.
Is there an order number here or?
No, there's no
Okay.
order.
So we adopt that,
Just
adopt
accept
this,
the
right?
report.
Okay. So I move that we adopt successful bids as presented for tranche 2 for procurement of wholesale electric supply to meet standard offer service load of Delmarva Power and Light up to June 1, 2017.
I second.
Any questions on the motion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Thank you all very much. All right, and now, Mr. Howard, hearing schedule, there is none. Is there any members of the public who would like to make comment? There being none, director's comments, please.
Madam Acting Chair, Commissioners, I certainly appreciate your indulgence with me. I would like to reinforce the Happy Groundhog's Day, make sure that you're all aware that the groundhog saw his shadow and that we will have 6 more, according to Puxatawny Phil, we will have 6 more weeks of winter weather. I would also like to thank Madam Acting Chair for lunch for the commission staff. I'm sorry about the rest of you, but if you'd known to come earlier, you could have had lunch down here with us.
You're welcome.
We have brought before you in the past issues related to the FERC-NOPR.
NOPR's exclusion of net metering customers. Essentially, to remind you, the FERC-NOPR makes clear that there should be no duplication of compensation for customers that are engaged in both retail compensation program and the wholesale electric markets. Staff has and continues to strongly support that exclusion of net metering customers from participation in the wholesale markets. Second, in order to effectuate this bright line test that we just discussed, staff strongly recommends that a single meter cannot identify both retail and wholesale transactions. And last, staff would request that in addition to relevant distribution utilities, notice of customer aggregation be given to the relevant regulatory electric retail rate authority, which would be this commission, in order to ensure compliance with the standard that customers participating in the retail markets are not also participating in the wholesale markets. So next I'll just walk you through a couple of additions and expansions to the comments since kind of the last time we spoke. Staff felt necessary to add to the comments a section reiterating our support for the general scope and intention of the NOPR. In discussing with some other industry participants, staff was concerned that there might generally be a lack of support for the overarching goals of the NOPR, and we thought it would be important to reiterate that we generally support the scope and intention of the NOPR. Specifically, staff feels that the provisions in the NOPR could create significant value to the ratepayers of Delaware. Specifically, if you recall the discussion we had on FTRs a while ago, the fact that Delaware is a load pocket results in a fair amount of congestion on the electric system, and some of these DER resources are uniquely tailored to alleviate some of these issues and generally lower prices for Delaware electric customers as a whole. The next expansion is just a further explanation of the basis of our contention that electrons cannot be unmingled, which is a 1972 Supreme Court decision, Florida Power and Light versus the Federal Power Commission. Similar to the section where we feel the need to reiterate our support, we've also noticed that there is some support for the notion that contract paths can separate retail and wholesale transactions. And what that means is that coming through a single connection point or metering point, to have a different contract for retail and wholesale transactions. Some market participants feel that these contract paths will be sufficient to retain the jurisdictional boundary between FERC and state commissions. Staff feels that this is not a practicable solution. Essentially, that FPC versus FPL case notes that electrons that are brought together in a single point are commingled like molecules of water in a reservoir, is the quote from the Supreme Court. And in staff's view, it is unlikely that molecules of water in a reservoir can ever be unmingled. And if this is the standard, as the Supreme Court has set forth, staff would recommend that in order to retain the jurisdictional split, there must be two separate meters, one each to measure retail and wholesale transactions. At this point, I know that you have a draft of staff's proposed comments, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have or take any direction you'd be willing to offer at this time.
Yes, thank you, Madam Acting Chair. Thanks for the midnight reading. Appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.
I want to start in consideration of our new public advocate, and I know that Ms. Iori will brief you with all of the acronyms, but if you don't know what a FERC NOPR is, it's Federal Energy Regulatory Commission Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. Okay. Mr. DeLosa, you made a number of outlined comments, and I thought they were very well done in contrast to what the position of, let's say, NARUC is taking moving into this arena in response to the rulemaking. Help me understand the concept of aggregators, their role, and who has jurisdiction over them based on their physical location, ultimate load location, or storage facilities.
Certainly. So I'd start out by saying that particular policy outline was drafted by my colleague, Mr. Farber. Can't take credit for that. But I'd be more than happy to explain the concept of aggregators to you. Essentially, what FERC proposes is that an aggregator would be an entity, could be any business entity that would take different distributed energy resources as defined in the NOPR and essentially bring them together for the purposes of bidding them into the wholesale market. Now, as far as geographical scope, the NOPR actually seeks comment on that, and the FERC guidance so far is to have the geographical location be as wide as is technically feasible. Now, essentially, with the exclusion from retail compensation of these resources, all of the aggregators and the individual points of aggregation would fall under FERC jurisdiction. Now, that is closely tied to, as I said, the fact that any customer participating in an aggregation would be precluded from receiving retail revenues such as net energy metering or demand response.
I was going to say, that leads me to the other comment I had, was that you want the state's retail issues and solutions depend on the final manner in which the DERs are deployed and operated.
Yes, and this is essentially why staff believes that the very bright line test that FERC has set forth is a practicable one, because as far as staff is concerned, as soon as a customer decides to forego their retail eligibility for wholesale eligibility, then the jurisdiction over that customer and that customer's transactions shifts from the state commission to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And so by allowing this test to distinguish between customers, it allows a clear bifurcation of jurisdiction and will prevent there being crossover, which can lead to jurisdictional problems.
So does that implies in some ways that the jurisdiction over rate making for those customers who now participate with aggregators and DERs is taken out of the scope of the Commission's responsibility?
So it would be the rate making to sell that energy. And at the current time, there is a pretty thorough PJM stakeholder process going on regarding, as you can imagine, this turns into a rabbit hole, right? You have many different setups that you can connect to the grid, and you can have certain, is it a simple buy all, sell all, where you buy all from the retail and sell all to the wholesale? Or do you have like a battery where you have a meter that serves your house, and then the battery is totally separate, and it buys from wholesale and sells at wholesale? Mm-hmm. So these essentially are really challenging questions, and they continue to become more complicated. And essentially, staff's position is that with the clear guidance that you have to have one meter for each, and if you participate in one, you can't participate in the other, then the implementation guidelines that can be developed through the PJM stakeholder process can follow these bright jurisdictional guidelines and lead to a solution that works for all the ratepayers and the market that they want to participate in.
Okay, two more questions. I was going to ask you, do we have yet a vision on DER issues and deployments from PJM, but it sounds like that's a process that's being worked right now.
That's correct. Yeah, right now it's being worked in the Market Implementation Committee. They've had a series of meetings, special meetings regarding distributed energy resources. At this point, that PJM process is only for what's called ancillary services for distributed energy resources, which is not energy or capacity, but really kind of the fine movements in electricity that are second to second. And so essentially the PJM stakeholder process is going to move through each of these different components one at a time and eventually get to the vision of DER with wholesale and retail as a result of this NOPR that we're filing comments on.
All right, comment. I really appreciate that you've helped to put this matter into perspective, given it some comparisons in terms of what we think would be most beneficial for our ratepayers here in Delaware. So I support the recommendations that staff is bringing to the Commission. So what do you need from us, if anything?
Mr. Howard, I believe the authorization from January 10th to file the comments would stand, and this would just serve as an update along the way, if you will.
If you'll recall, Commissioner Gray, you had asked to see the comments before they went in, and this is about as close as we're going to get at this point in time to the final comments.
I think you've done a great job, so thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner.
No further.
Mr. Howard?
Thank you.
Melissa, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I know you and John have been working hard on a lot of those different issues. I do have one additional item that I would like to at least make you aware of under administrative matters. I know we deal a lot around here with electric issues and all those wonderful confusing acronyms, so I'll try and stay away from that. On January 27th, if you'll take note, Eastern Shore Natural Gas submitted a revised tariff for a general system-wide rate increase with a proposed effective date of March 1st, 2017. Eastern Shore Natural Gas Company is a transmission gas company, and they handle the transportation paths for all the gas that come onto the shore. It will be a 31.7% increase, average increase in transportation costs onto the peninsula. We are very concerned about that. There is a debt equity ratio issue. They are asking for a 13.75 return on equity. Needless to say, we will be filing some type of comment. We have a meeting scheduled with our FERC attorney to discuss it later today, and we'll make some decisions at that point. Unfortunately, I believe these have to be filed relatively quickly, I believe, like next week. So you will, again, have to trust staff to file comments appropriately in this particular proceeding. Part of the increase that Eastern Shore Natural Gas is seeking is to recover funding for the White Oak lateral. If you know, there's been some gas construction going on down around the Calpine generation station and everything. But they had a White Oak lateral that they constructed, and they also had a White Oak main line that they've constructed. Plus, they also are asking for some O&M increases and some other increases of expenses and stuff that they've experienced. So we will be following that docket. It's docket RP 17-363, and staff will be following that docket and filing some comment on that, just to make you aware of that. And I would love to answer questions, but that's probably all I know.
Is this filed for approval from this commission or filed with another entity?
It's filed at FERC.
At FERC, okay.
This is a wholesale jurisdiction. FERC has jurisdiction over the natural gas pipelines and transmission pipelines. Lastly, I guess I would like to make everybody aware that we have an evidentiary hearing scheduled at our next meeting on February the 23rd. It'll be docket number 161032, which is the Chesapeake Utilities Environmental Rider Rate that we will have a hearing on at that meeting. And as I've just mentioned, the next commission meeting will be Thursday, again, February the 23rd, 2017, starting at 1 o'clock. Thank you, Madam Acting Chair and Commissioners. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else to come before this august body? There being none, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Very, very well done. Very well.